The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the practice room, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Sophia Chen sat at the grand piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. This was her fifth attempt at the same passage of Chopin's Ballade No. 1, and each time her hands had begun to shake, just as she reached the difficult run of notes. Just one more try, she whispered to herself. The practice rooms at Eastman School of Music were her sanctuary, especially this early in the morning when most students were still asleep. Here, alone with the piano, Sophia could make mistakes without judgment. She flexed her fingers, repositioned her hands, and began again. The first few measures flowed beautifully from her fingertips. Sophia felt the familiar warmth spreading through her chest as the music took shape. This was why she had fallen in love with piano at age 5, sitting beside her grandmother on a worn bench in their small apartment. The way the notes could paint emotions in the air, like colors only the heart could see. Then came the challenging section, the rapid cascade of notes that required both technical precision and emotional control. Her right pinky finger missed, a sharp, throwing off her rhythm. She tried to recover, but her hands began to tremble. The beautiful melody crumbled into disjointed sounds. Sophia stopped and buried her face in her hands. She had been at Eastman for almost a year now, surrounded by prodigies who seemed to play effortlessly. Meanwhile, her performance anxiety only seemed to be getting worse. "If you're quite finished torturing that piece, some of us have actual practicing to do." The voice from the doorway made Sophia jump. Professor Richard Harmon stood there, his tall frame leaning against the doorframe, his critical eyes fixed on her hands. He was the most respected and feared piano instructor at Eastman, known for producing competition winners and soloists who performed with major symphonies around the world. "I'm sorry, Professor Harmon," Sophia said, gathering her sheet music. "I was just leaving." No, continue." He walked into the room, his footsteps echoing. "I'm curious to hear what Ms. Chen considers practice these days." Sophia's mouth went dry. She had applied to study under Professor Harmon when she first arrived, but had been rejected after her audition. Instead, she'd been assigned to Professor Lin, who was kind but lacked Harmon's prestige and connections. "The Ballade?" Harmon raised an eyebrow, looking at her sheet music, ambitious for someone still struggling with basic Beethoven sonatas. Sophia felt heat rising in her cheeks. Last month, in her mid-term recital, she had fumbled through the third movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and Professor Harmon had been in the audience, his pen scratching notes throughout her performance. "I thought, with enough practice," she began. "Some things can't be fixed with mere practice," he said, his voice softening into something worse than criticism, pity. "Natural talent, musical intuition, these are things you either have or don't." Sophia's fingers curled into her palms. She had heard these words before, from instructors at competitions when she was younger. Yet she had kept playing, kept trying, because whenever she was alone with the music, it spoke to her in ways she couldn't explain. "Play from the beginning," Professor Harmon instructed, taking a seat in the corner chair usually occupied by collaborative pianists during practice sessions. Sophia turned back to the piano, painfully aware of his presence. She placed her fingers on the keys, trying to recapture the peaceful feeling from earlier. But her hands felt stiff, disconnected from her body. She began to play, focusing on each note, each phrase. For a few blessed moments, the music flowed, and she allowed herself to hope. Then came the difficult passage, and with it, the trembling. Stop. Professor Harmon stood up, his face contorted in what looked like physical pain. "What exactly do you think you're doing to Chopin? This piece requires technical mastery and emotional depth, not this hesitant pecking." He stepped toward the piano. "Move over." Sophia slid to the edge of the bench, her legs feeling weak. Professor Harmon sat beside her, his cologne smelling of cedar and something bitter. "Listen," he said. His hands descended on the keys, and the room filled with sound, powerful, confident, precise. The same notes she had struggled with flowed from his fingers like water. He didn't just play the notes, he released them as if they had been trapped in the piano all along, waiting for the right hands to set them free. When he finished the passage, he turned to look at her. "That is how it's meant to sound. Can you hear the difference?" Sophia nodded, her throat tight. Of course she could hear it. The difference between stumbling and dancing, between reciting and speaking. "Now you try again," he said, standing up. With trembling hands, Sophia positioned herself at the center of the bench again. She knew what was coming. Another failure, but now with a perfect comparison fresh in everyone's ears. She began to play, and predictably, when she reached the difficult section, her fingers tangled. Professor Harmon let out a short, sharp laugh. The sound cut through the room like glass. "Perhaps you should consider music appreciation instead of performance," he said, gathering his own sheet music from his leather messenger bag. "Not everyone is meant to be on stage. Some are meant to be in the audience." He walked toward the door, then paused. "The master class with Yu Wang is next week. I'd reconsider participating if I were you. There's no need to embarrass yourself in front of one of the world's premier pianists." After he left, Sophia sat motionless at the piano, his laughter echoing in her mind. She had been practicing this piece specifically for that master class, hoping to impress the famous pianist who had been her idol since childhood. Slowly, she closed the fallboard over the keys. The smooth wooden surface reflected her face, eyes red-rimmed, mouth set in a tight line. She had never thought of herself as particularly talented, but she had always believed that passion and hard work could make up for what she lacked in natural ability. Now she wasn't so sure. The practice rooms began to fill as other students arrived. Through the walls, Sophia could hear fragments of Liszt, Bach, and Debussy. Each piece played with confidence she couldn't imagine possessing. She gathered her things and slipped out, keeping her head down as she passed the other practice rooms. Outside, the spring air was cool against her face. The campus was coming to life, students hurrying to morning classes or grabbing coffee from the cafe across the street. Sophia found a bench under a flowering cherry tree and sat down, pulling out her phone. 3 missed calls from her mother. A text asking how her practice was going. Sophia stared at the screen, unsure what to say. Her parents had sacrificed so much for her to be here. Her father taking extra shifts at the hospital, her mother tutoring math students late into the evenings. How could she tell them that maybe it had all been for nothing? Instead, she opened her music theory textbook, determined to at least excel in her academic classes. But the symbols and notes swam before her eyes, Professor Harmon's words drowning out everything else. "Hey, piano girl, saved you some banana bread." Sophia looked up to see May, her roommate, holding out a paper bag. May was studying violin and somehow managed to balance intense practice with a vibrant social life and excellent grades. "Thanks," Sophia said, taking the bag. "But I'm not really hungry." May sat down beside her. "Rough morning?" "Professor Harmon heard me practicing. It didn't go well." May's expression darkened. "That man is toxic. Half the department thinks he's a genius. The other half thinks he should have retired a decade ago." "He's not wrong, though," Sophia said quietly. "I can't get through a single performance without my hands shaking. Maybe I don't have what it takes." "That's nonsense," May said firmly. "Remember when you played that Debussy piece at the dorm gathering? Everyone stopped talking. You made misses." "Winter's Cry, and she's been teaching music for 40 years, Sophia remembered. Playing for friends in the casual setting of their dorm lounge was different. No judges, no professors with scorecards, no audience expecting perfection. "That's different," she said. "Is it? Or is it just that you believe in yourself when Harmon isn't around to tear you down?" Before Sophia could answer, her phone buzzed with a new text. It was from her grandmother in China, as if somehow sensing she needed her right now. "Remember why you play." The message read in Mandarin. Below was a photo of Sophia at age 6, sitting at her grandmother's old upright piano, her small fingers stretched across the keys, her face alive with joy. Sophia felt something loosen in her chest. Before competitions and music schools, before techniques and critiques, there had been just this, the simple pleasure of making beautiful sounds. I have theory in 10 minutes, May said, standing up. But listen, the practice room on the third floor, the one with the view of the park? It's free this afternoon. The acoustics are better there, and Harmon never goes up that many stairs if he can avoid it. Sophia smiled for the first time that day. Thanks. After May left, Sophia looked again at the childhood photo, zooming in on her young, carefree face. Then she looked at the text from her mother, still unanswered. Practice was tough today, she finally wrote back. But I'm not giving up. She stood, straightened her shoulders, and headed to her music theory class. Professor Harmon's laughter still echoed in her mind, but now it was joined by another sound. The memory of her grandmother's voice telling her that music wasn't about being perfect, it was about being heard. The master class was a week away. She had time to practice, to prepare, to find a way to play through the fear. And maybe, just maybe, prove Professor Harmon wrong. That evening, Sophia sat cross-legged on her dorm room bed, her laptop open to a video call. The familiar face of her grandmother, Lin Wei, filled the screen, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, the small apartment in Shanghai visible in the background. Ah, there's my little songbird, Grandmother Lin said in Mandarin, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Why the sad face? Tell me everything. Sophia hesitated, then the whole story came tumbling out. Professor Harmon's criticism, her shaking hands, the master class she was now afraid to attend. As she spoke, her grandmother listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. You know, Grandmother Lin said when Sophia finally paused for breath, when I was your age, I also had a teacher who made me question everything about myself. Sophia leaned closer to the screen. Her grandmother rarely spoke about her past as a pianist. All Sophia knew came from old photographs and the occasional stories her mother shared. How Grandmother Lin had once been a celebrated pianist in Shanghai, how she had performed with orchestras across China before the Cultural Revolution changed everything. What happened? Sophia asked. He told me my interpretations were too emotional, too personal, that I wasn't respecting the composer's intentions. Grandmother Lin smiled faintly. He was partly right. I was young and stubborn, but he was also wrong. She reached for something off-screen and returned with a worn leather album. Opening it, she held up a yellowed newspaper clipping to the camera. Sophia could make out a much younger version of her grandmother seated at a grand piano. Her posture, perfect, her face serene. This was from my first major concert in 1962, Grandmother Lin said. I played Chopin that night too. The same teacher who criticized me was in the audience. After the performance, he came backstage and said something I never forgot. I was wrong about you. You don't play the notes, you release them. The phrase sent a shiver down Sophia's spine, eerily similar to what she had thought while watching Professor Harmon play. But that's exactly what I can't do, Sophia said. When I practice alone, I can feel the music. But the moment someone is listening, especially someone like Professor Harmon, I freeze up. Who taught you to play, little songbird? Grandmother Lin asked gently. You did. And how did I teach you? Sophia closed her eyes, remembering those early lessons. By ear. You would play something, and I would copy it. Over and over until it sounded right. Before you knew what notes were, before you could read music, her grandmother said, you played from here. She touched her heart. Not from here. She pointed to her head. But that's not enough anymore, Sophia said. At Eastman, everyone plays perfectly. Perfect technique without soul is just noise, Grandmother Lin replied. Remember the old story about the two piano makers? Sophia smiled despite herself. It was one of her grandmother's favorite tales, told so many times that Sophia could recite it from memory. The one where they both claimed to make the best pianos in the village? Grandmother Lin nodded. The first maker showed off his pianos. Perfect craftsmanship. Every key precisely weighted, every string perfectly tuned. The second maker's piano looked ordinary, but when he played a single note, everyone in the room felt it in their hearts. Technical perfection versus emotional resonance. She paused. Which piano maker are you, Sophia? The question hung between them, stretching across continents. I don't know anymore, Sophia admitted. Then it's time to remember, her grandmother said firmly. Before your next practice, I want you to do something for me. Don't look at the sheet music. Don't think about Professor Harmon or the master class or what anyone else expects. Just close your eyes and remember why you fell in love with the piano. After the call ended, Sophia lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. On her desk sat framed photographs, her parents at her high school graduation, arms around her shoulders, May and Sophia on their first day at Eastman, and the oldest one, slightly faded, of 5-year-old Sophia sitting beside her grandmother at the piano, both of them laughing at something now forgotten. Sophia got up and picked up the childhood photo. There was something in her young face that she couldn't recognize in herself anymore. A freedom, a joy that had nothing to do with perfection. Her phone buzzed with a text from May. "Third floor practice room is all yours until 9 p.m. Go make some magic." Gathering her things, Sophia headed across campus. The evening air was cool, the brick buildings of Eastman glowing amber in the setting sun. Inside, the hallways echoed with music, a violin concerto from one room, a trumpet exercise from another, voices from the choir rehearsal downstairs. The third floor practice room was at the end of the hallway, its window overlooking the park, as May had promised. Sophia sat at the piano, not as grand as the ones downstairs, but well maintained, its keys smooth beneath her fingertips. For a long moment, she just sat there, hands in her lap. Then, remembering her grandmother's words, she closed her eyes. Why had she fallen in love with the piano? The memory came to her suddenly. She was 6 years old, sick with a fever that had kept her home from school for days. Her grandmother, visiting from Shanghai, had carried her to the piano and sat her on her lap. "Music heals," she had said, guiding Sophia's small hands to the keys. Together they had played a simple melody, over and over, until Sophia had fallen asleep with the notes echoing in her dreams. When she woke hours later, her fever had broken. Sophia opened her eyes and placed her hands on the keys. Without looking at any sheet music, she began to play that same simple melody from her childhood. The notes were clear and sweet, filling the small room. From there, her fingers found their way to other remembered pieces, a Chinese folk song her grandmother had taught her, a Mozart sonata she had played in her first recital, a Debussy prelude she had learned just because she loved the way it sounded like water. She played for nearly an hour without stopping, one piece flowing into the next, not caring about mistakes or technique, just letting the music come. When she finally paused, she realized her cheeks were wet with tears. Taking a deep breath, she turned to Chopin's ballad, the piece that had caused her so much anxiety that morning. But this time, instead of starting with the sheet music, she played it from memory, from heart. Her hand still trembled slightly when she reached the difficult passage, but this time she didn't stop. She pushed through, focusing not on hitting every note perfectly, but on the feeling of the music, on what Chopin might have felt when writing it. When she finished, she was startled by the sound of clapping from the doorway. Professor Lin, her assigned instructor, stood there with a warm smile. Unlike Professor Harmon, she was gentle in her criticism and generous with her praise, qualities that had initially made Sophia wonder if she wasn't being pushed hard enough. "That was beautiful," Professor Lin said, entering the room. "Especially that final passage. You've been working hard." "Thank you," Sophia said, surprised by the compliment. "But I made so many mistakes." "Yes, you did," Professor Lin agreed matter-of-factly, "and yet I felt every note. Technique can be polished, Sophia, but what you just played, that connection to the music, that's much harder to teach." She sat down beside Sophia. "I heard about what happened with Professor Harmon this morning." Sophia looked down at her hands. "News travels fast." "It's a small department," Professor Lin said with a shrug. "And Professor Harmon isn't known for his subtlety." "He's right, though," Sophia said quietly. "I'm not ready for the master class next week." "That's for you to decide," Professor Lin replied. "But I think Yuja Wang might surprise you. She wasn't always the confident performer she is today. In fact, She hesitated, then continued. She once told me that before every performance, she still hears the voice of a teacher who told her she would never succeed. Really? Sophia found this hard to believe. Yu Wang was known not just for her technical brilliance, but for her fearless stage presence. Really, Professor Lin confirmed. We all have those voices. The question is whether we let them drown out the music. She stood up. The sign-up sheet for the masterclass is still open. Think about it. After Professor Lin left, Sophia remained at the piano, her mind churning with everything she had learned today. Professor Harmon's laughter still stung, but now it was balanced by other voices, her grandmother's wisdom, Professor Lin's encouragement, even the memory of May's confidence in her. She pulled out her phone and looked again at the childhood photo her grandmother had sent. What would that little girl do? The answer came immediately. She would play, simply for the joy of it. Sophia took out her laptop and opened her email. The sign-up form for Yu Wang's masterclass was still in her inbox, the deadline extended to midnight. Her cursor hovered over the delete button for a long moment. Then, taking a deep breath, she filled out the form. In the section asking which piece she would perform, she typed, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. After hitting send, she returned to the piano. The sky outside the window had darkened, stars appearing one by one. For the next hour she practiced, not with the frantic energy of someone trying to achieve perfection, but with the focused intention of someone remembering why they began. As she played the final notes of the ballade, something had shifted inside her. Professor Harmon might still laugh at her performance next week. Her hands might still shake. But for the first time in months, those possibilities no longer terrified her. What mattered was the music, and the music she was beginning to remember had always been inside her, waiting to be released. The next 5 days passed in a blur of classes, practice sessions, and sleepless nights. Sophia avoided the main practice rooms, preferring the quiet sanctuary of the third-floor room where she could play without fear of Professor Harmon's judgment. Each evening she video-called her grandmother, playing portions of the ballade and listening to her gentle suggestions. Music is a language, Grandmother Lin would remind her. Don't just speak it, feel it. On Wednesday afternoon, Sophia was hurrying across campus late for her music theory class when she nearly collided with Dean Williams, the head of the piano department. Ah, Miss Chen, the dean said, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. Just the person I was looking for. Sophia clutched her textbooks tighter, certain she was in trouble. Perhaps Professor Harmon had complained about her playing, or worse, recommended she be placed on academic probation. I'm sorry I'm running late, Dean Williams, she began. No need to apologize, the dean said. I was hoping to speak with you about something important. Do you have a moment after your class? Sophia nodded, her throat suddenly dry. Excellent. Come to my office at 4. Throughout the lecture on counterpoint, Sophia could barely focus. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. By the time she knocked on Dean Williams's door at precisely 4 o'clock, her palms were sweating. Come in, the dean called. His office was warm and cluttered, shelves overflowing with books and scores, the walls covered with framed concert programs and photographs of the dean with famous musicians. A baby grand piano occupied one corner, sheet music spread across its surface. Please sit down, he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. How are you finding your first year at Eastman? It's been challenging, Sophia admitted, choosing her words carefully. Dean Williams smiled. As it should be. We don't accept students who need things to be easy. He shuffled through some papers on his desk. I've been hearing interesting things about you, Ms. Chen. Sophia's heart sank. From Professor Harmon? Among others, the dean said, his expression unreadable. Professor Lin speaks very highly of your musicality, though she mentions you struggle with performance anxiety. Sophia looked down at her hands. I'm working on that. Good, Dean Williams said. Because I have a proposition for you. He pulled out a program from his desk drawer and handed it to her. Sophia scanned the elegant lettering. Eastman School of Music Spring Showcase. This is for this weekend, she said, confused. The showcase was one of Eastman's most prestigious events, featuring only the top students performing with the school orchestra. Attendance was mandatory for all music students, but performers were selected months in advance. Indeed it is, the dean confirmed, and we have a situation. Theodore Park, who was scheduled to perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, has come down with a severe case of tendinitis. His doctor has forbidden him to play for at least 3 weeks. Sophia's eyes widened as she began to understand. But the showcase is in 2 days. Precisely our dilemma, Dean Williams said, leaning back in his chair. We've been scrambling to find a replacement. Most of our advanced students are already performing other pieces or simply don't have the Rachmaninoff in their repertoire. But I don't, Sophia began. Professor Lin mentioned you've been working on it, the dean interrupted. She played me a recording from your practice session last month. Sophia felt heat rising to her face. The Rachmaninoff Concerto had been her private project, something she worked on during her free time because she loved it, not because she ever expected to perform it publicly. She hadn't even told Professor Lin she was practicing it. The woman must have overheard her playing it after hours. That was just for fun, Sophia said weakly. I'm nowhere near ready to perform it, especially not with an orchestra. That's not what I heard, Dean Williams said. Your interpretation was quite moving. Technically imperfect, yes, but with the emotional quality that's rare in a student your age. Sophia shook her head, panic rising in her chest. Dean Williams, I can barely play Chopin without my hands shaking. Rachmaninoff in front of the entire school, with an orchestra. It would be a disaster. The dean studied her for a long moment. Do you know why I became a pianist, Ms. Chen? The abrupt change of subject caught Sophia off guard. No, sir. I was 8 years old, attending my first concert with my father. The soloist was an elderly man, well past his prime. His technique was showing its age. He missed notes, his tempo was inconsistent. Dean Williams smiled at the memory. But when he played, something happened in that concert hall. A kind of magic. I didn't understand it then, but I felt it. That's why I begged for piano lessons the very next day. He stood up and walked to the piano in the corner, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. Years later, I learned that the pianist had been a student of Rachmaninoff himself. What he lacked in precision, he made up for in direct connection to the composer's intentions. That's something no amount of technical training can provide. Sophia remained silent, uncertain where this was leading. The showcase needs a soloist, Ms. Chen, Dean Williams said, turning back to her. And while I have several students who could play the notes perfectly, I'm looking for someone who can capture the spirit of the piece. But what about Professor Harmon? Sophia asked. He's made it very clear what he thinks of my playing. Professor Harmon, the dean said with a slight frown, is an excellent technician and a demanding teacher. His opinions are his own. He paused. He's also not the only faculty member with a say in these matters. Hope and terror warred within Sophia. To perform with the Eastman Orchestra was an honor usually reserved for graduate students or exceptionally gifted undergraduates. If she succeeded, it could transform her standing at the school. If she failed, I don't know if I can do this, she said honestly. That's the beauty of music, Ms. Chen. None of us truly knows what we're capable of until we're on stage. Dean Williams returned to his desk. The rehearsal is tomorrow afternoon at 3. The orchestra has already been working on the piece with Theodore, so they're well prepared. All you need to do is show up and play. Sophia took a deep breath. Can I think about it? Of course, the dean said, but I'll need your answer by this evening. If you decline, I'll need to make other arrangements. Walking back to her dorm, Sophia felt like she was in a dream. The spring air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers. Students lounged on the lawn enjoying the sunshine, but she barely noticed any of it. Her mind was filled with the cascading notes of Rachmaninoff, the prospect both thrilling and terrifying. In her room, she found May sprawled on her bed, violin case open beside her as she rosined her bow. You look like you've seen a ghost, May said, looking up. What happened? Sophia sank onto her own bed. Dean Williams wants me to replace Theodore Park at the showcase. May's eyes widened. Theodore has tendinitis? That's awful. Wait, he wants you to play the Rachmaninoff? Sophia nodded mutely. That's incredible. May jumped up. Soph, do you know what this means? This is huge. It's huge if I play well, Sophia corrected her. If I freeze up or my hands shake, it's just a very public humiliation. So don't freeze up, May said simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. You've been practicing that piece for months. I've heard you. It sounds amazing. Through a wall, maybe, Sophia said. Up close, you'd hear all the mistakes. May sat down beside her friend. Look, I get it. Performing is scary. My first year at music camp, I threw up right before my solo. Like all over my shoes, had to perform in my socks. Despite her anxiety, Sophia couldn't help laughing. What happened? I played terribly for the first minute, May admitted. And then, I don't know. Something clicked. I stopped thinking about the audience, about my sock feet, about everything except the music. Ended up getting second place. She bumped Sophia's shoulder with her own. You can do this. And even if it goes badly, which it won't, at least you'll have tried. Isn't that better than always wondering what might have happened? Sophia wasn't so sure, but she appreciated her friend's confidence. I need to call my grandmother. May nodded and grabbed her violin. I'll give you some privacy. But Soph, say yes. You'll regret it if you don't. After May left, Sophia video called her grandmother, explaining the situation in a rush of words. Grandmother Lynn listened patiently, her face serious. When Sophia finished, she said, "This is wonderful news." "It's terrifying news," Sophia corrected. "I'm not ready." Was I ready when they closed the Shanghai Conservatory during the Cultural Revolution? Was I ready when they called my music bourgeois and took away my piano? Her grandmother's voice was gentle despite the painful memories. We are never ready for the moments that define us, little songbird. We simply meet them as best we can. Sophia felt tears prickling behind her eyes. What if I embarrass myself? What if Professor Harmon was right about me? Then you will have learned something valuable, her grandmother said pragmatically. But what if he was wrong? What if this is your moment to show everyone, including yourself, what you're truly capable of? After ending the call, Sophia sat for a long time in the quiet of her room. Fear and doubt still churned inside her, but beneath them was something else. A flicker of excitement, of possibility. She picked up her phone and texted Dean Williams. "I'll do it." His reply came almost immediately. "Excellent. Rehearsal tomorrow at 3 p.m. Lowry Hall." That night, Sophia barely slept. She practiced mentally, fingers twitching against her blanket as she ran through the concerto in her mind. When dawn finally broke, she dressed quickly and headed to the practice rooms, determined to make the most of the hours before rehearsal. She was so focused on her practice that she didn't notice Professor Harmon standing in the doorway until he cleared his throat. "I heard the news," he said, his voice cool. "Quite a remarkable opportunity for a first-year student." Sophia's hands stilled on the keys. "Dean Williams asked me to step in." "So I've been told." Professor Harmon entered the room, his expression unreadable. "Rachmaninoff is not for the faint of heart, Miss Chen. His second concerto in particular requires both technical mastery and emotional maturity." "I know," Sophia said quietly. "Do you?" Professor Harmon raised an eyebrow. "Because from what I've seen of your playing, you possess neither." The words stung, but Sophia was too tired and too focused to let them devastate her as they once might have. "Then I suppose Saturday's performance will be educational for both of us." Something flickered across Professor Harmon's face. Surprise, perhaps, at her newfound backbone. "Indeed," he said after a moment. "The showcase begins at 7. Don't be late." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Miss Chen? I would recommend you practice the cadenza in the first movement. Your left hand was consistently behind tempo in the recording Dean Williams played for the faculty. After he left, Sophia sat frozen at the piano. Recording? Dean Williams had played her practice session for the entire faculty, including Professor Harmon. Humiliation washed over her. Then another thought struck her. Professor Harmon had just given her actual constructive criticism instead of dismissing her outright. And he was right. The cadenza in the first movement was one of her weak spots. Taking a deep breath, Sophia placed her hands on the keys again. There was no time for embarrassment or self-doubt. She had exactly 29 hours until the showcase and a mountain of work ahead of her. She began to play. The rehearsal with the orchestra was nothing like Sophia had imagined. She had expected cold formality, impatient musicians, and a conductor, frustrated with having to work with a last-minute replacement. Instead, she found a group of students and faculty eager to make the performance work. "Don't worry about being perfect," Conductor Rivera told her after their first rocky run-through. "We'll follow you. Just give us clear cues when you're about to enter after the orchestral sections." They practiced for 3 hours, stopping and starting, working through the rough patches. By the end, Sophia's back ached and her fingers were sore, but the music had begun to take shape. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was recognizable as Rachmaninoff's beloved concerto. "Good work today," the conductor said as they packed up. "Tomorrow, arrive 2 hours early. We'll do one final run-through before the performance." As Sophia gathered her sheet music, the concertmaster, a graduate student named Chen Li, approached her. "First big performance with an orchestra?" he asked. Sophia nodded, too exhausted for words. "You're doing better than you think," he said, tucking his violin under his arm. "Everyone's nervous their first time, but remember, we want you to succeed. The better you play, the better we all sound." His kindness brought unexpected tears to Sophia's eyes. "Thank you. Get some rest," he advised. "And don't practice too much tomorrow. Your muscles need to recover." That night, Sophia video called her parents to share the news. Their faces filled the screen, her father still in his hospital scrubs, her mother's reading glasses perched on her nose. "Our daughter performing with the Eastman Orchestra," her mother exclaimed. "I wish we could be there." "I'll ask May to record it," Sophia promised, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Her father leaned closer to the camera. "Are you eating enough? Getting enough sleep? You look tired." "I'm fine, Dad," she assured him. "Just been practicing. A lot." "Not too much, I hope," he said with the concern of both a parent and a doctor. "Overworking the muscles can do more harm than good." After saying goodnight to her parents, Sophia tried to follow Chen Li's advice and get some rest, but sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept replaying the rehearsal, all the places where she had faltered or lost tempo. Around midnight, she gave up and pulled out her laptop, searching for recordings of the concerto. Video after video showed flawless performances by renowned pianists, their fingers flying effortlessly over the keys, their connection with the orchestra seamless. The gap between their mastery and her struggling attempt seemed insurmountable. In frustration, she closed the videos and instead opened her email, scrolling through old messages from her grandmother. One from months ago caught her eye. A link to a recording with the subject line, "Remember this one." Sophia clicked on it. It was a performance of the same Rachmaninoff concerto, but unlike the polished recording she'd just been watching, this one was from 1941, scratchy and imperfect. The pianist, a Russian whose name Sophia didn't recognize, took liberties with the tempo, emphasized unusual phrases, and even missed some notes during the most technical passages. Yet there was something about it, a raw emotion, a sense that the pianist was discovering the music alongside the audience. Sophia listened to it twice, tears streaming down her face before finally falling asleep with her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. Technical perfection without soul is just noise. Morning came too quickly. Sophia spent an hour at the Ijainar piano, not practicing the difficult passages as she normally would, but simply playing through the entire concerto at a relaxed tempo, focusing on the emotion of each section. Then, following Chen Li's advice, she put the music aside. The rest of the day passed in a blur. May helped her choose an outfit, a simple black dress that had belonged to Sophia's mother during her college days. "Classic but not stuffy," May declared. "You'll look like a real soloist." As evening approached, Sophia's nerves began to fray. Her hands trembled as she pinned her hair back, and her stomach rejected the light meal May insisted she eat. "What if I freeze?" she asked as they walked toward Lowry Hall, the spring air doing nothing to cool her flushed face. "What if I forget everything?" "Then you'll improvise," May said practically. "But you won't. You've got this, Soph." Backstage was controlled chaos, orchestra members tuning instruments, stage managers checking lighting cues, faculty members giving last-minute instructions to their students. Sophia found a quiet corner and closed her eyes, trying to center herself as her grandmother had taught her. 2 minutes, Ms. Chen." A stagehand touched her shoulder. "The conductor is ready for you." Taking a deep breath, Sophia followed him through the darkened wings. The stage lights were blinding, but she could make out the grand piano waiting at the center, its lid raised, the orchestra seated behind it. Conductor Rivera gave her an encouraging nod as she crossed to the piano. The audience was a shadowy mass beyond the lights. Somewhere out there sat Professor Harmon, Professor Lin, Dean Williams, May, and hundreds of other students and faculty members. Sophia felt her hands begin to shake as she sat down on the bench and adjusted its height. As the conductor raised his baton for the orchestral introduction, Sophia glanced into the wings. A movement caught her eye, someone holding up a phone. The screen showed her grandmother's face watching from halfway around the world. Sophia's heart lurched with sudden emotion. The orchestra began to play, the familiar melancholy theme washing over her. Sophia counted the measures until her entrance, her fingers poised above the keys. Then the moment arrived, her cue to begin. She placed her hands on the keyboard, took a breath, and played the first chord. The sound resonated through the hall, a rich, full tone that seemed to hang in the air. It was just one chord, 3 notes played together, but in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The hall, which had held a background rustle of programs and whispers even during the orchestral introduction, fell completely silent. Sophia felt it, that rare moment when everyone in a room is united in a single experience. The realization made her fingers falter slightly as she moved into the next measure, but she recovered quickly, focusing on the music rather than the audience. The first movement unfolded like a conversation between her and the orchestra, sometimes the piano, leading, sometimes following. The cadenza that Professor Harmon had mentioned came and went, her left hand maintaining the tempo just as she had practiced. As the movement concluded, there was a brief pause before the applause began, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Sophia didn't allow herself to look at the audience. Instead, she took a sip from the water glass beside the piano and prepared for the second movement, with its famously beautiful melody. This was the heart of the concerto, the part that had first made her fall in love with the piece years ago. As she played the opening theme, she thought of her grandmother, of the stories she had told about playing during difficult times, finding solace in music when words failed. The melody poured from her fingers with a tenderness that surprised even her. The orchestra responded, matching her phrasing, supporting her interpretation. For a few transcendent minutes, Sophia forgot about her nerves, about Professor Harmon, about everything except the conversation happening between her and the other musicians, all of them speaking Rachmaninoff's language together. By the time they reached the third movement, with its driving rhythm and technical challenges, Sophia was no longer playing for the audience or for her professors. She was playing for the pure joy of making music with others, of being part of something larger than herself. When the final chords resounded through the hall, there was a moment of complete stillness. Then the audience erupted in applause. Sophia sat frozen at the piano, her hands still on the keys, her heart pounding in her ears. Had she really done it? Had she actually made it through the entire concerto without a major mishap? Conductor Rivera was at her side, offering his hand to help her stand. The applause grew louder as she rose and took a small, shaky bow. The orchestra members were on their feet too, tapping their bows against their music stands in a musician's sign of approval. Sophia glanced toward the wings where the phone was still held up. She could just make out her grandmother's face on the screen, wet with tears but beaming with pride. As she took another bow, Sophia's eyes adjusted to the stage lights enough to see the front row of the audience. Dean Williams was applauding, enthusiastically. Professor Lin was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and Professor Harmon, the man whose laughter had once cut her to the quick, sat with his hands stilled in his lap, his expression one of genuine surprise. Their eyes met, across the footlights. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands and joined the applause. Backstage was a flurry of congratulations. Orchestra members patted her shoulder as they passed, murmuring, "Well done," and "Beautiful playing." Chen Li gave her a thumbs up. Dean Williams appeared, shaking her hand with both of his. "Remarkable," he said. "Absolutely remarkable. A few technical issues, certainly. But the musicality. My dear, you made me hear that piece anew." Professor Lin hugged her warmly. "I knew you could do it. And now you know it too." Sophia was about to respond when she saw Professor Harmon approaching. The backstage area quieted as he stopped in front of her. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden stillness. "That was unexpected." Sophia steeled herself for criticism. "Thank you for your advice about the cadenza, Professor. It helped." He seemed taken aback by her response. "Yes, well, your technique still needs considerable refinement." "I know," she said, surprising herself with her calm. "I have a lot to learn." Professor Harmon studied her for a moment, then said, something she never expected to hear from him. "But your musicality, the way you played that second movement." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It reminded me why I became a pianist in the first place." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving Sophia staring after him in disbelief. May found her moments later, throwing her arms around her in an exuberant hug. "You were amazing. The way everyone went completely silent when you played that first chord. I've never seen anything like it." Sophia hugged her back, still dazed by what had just happened, both on stage and in her brief exchange with Professor Yuan Harmon. "He actually complimented me," she whispered to May. "Professor Harmon said something nice about my playing." May grinned. "Well, he'd look pretty silly criticizing you after the audience nearly gave you a standing ovation, wouldn't he?" As they walked back to the dorm through the cool spring night, Sophia felt a strange lightness, as if something heavy had been lifted from her shoulders. She had faced her greatest fear, performing under pressure, and while it hadn't been perfect, it had been genuine. For the first time since coming to Eastman, she felt like she truly belonged there. In her room, she called her grandmother, who had watched the entire performance via May's phone. "Did you hear that silence when I played the first chord?" Sophia asked, still amazed by the memory. "I did," her grandmother said softly. "That's the moment they realized they weren't just hearing notes, they were hearing you." The days following the showcase passed in a dreamlike haze for Sophia. Students she had never spoken to smiled at her in the hallways, or stopped to congratulate her. Several professors nodded approvingly when she entered their classrooms. Even the cafeteria workers seemed to give her slightly larger portions, as if good playing deserved extra mashed potatoes. "You're practically a campus celebrity," May teased as they walked to class together. "Should I start charging for autographs?" Sophia laughed, but the attention made her uncomfortable. "I wasn't even that good. I messed up at least a dozen times." "Nobody cares?" May said, linking her arm through Sophia's. "They remember how you made them feel, not whether you hit every note perfectly." This was true, Sophia realized. When people approached her, they didn't mention technical precision. Instead, they talked about the second movement, how it had moved them, or the way the first chord had seemed to change the air in the room. One afternoon, as Sophia was practicing in her usual third-floor sanctuary, a knock interrupted her. Professor Lin stood in the doorway, smiling. "I have news," she said, entering the room. "The video of your performance has been making the rounds among the faculty. Sophia winced. All my mistakes, immortalized forever. Those aren't what people are talking about, Professor Lin assured her. In fact, I've just come from a meeting where your name came up in a rather interesting context. She sat down on the spare chair, her expression both pleased and slightly mysterious. The New York Philharmonic has a young artists program each summer. They select a handful of promising students from conservatories across the country for a 6-week intensive program, culminating in a performance at Lincoln Center. Sophia's heart began to race. The New York Philharmonic's summer program was legendarily competitive. Students from Juilliard, Curtis, and other top conservatories fought for those spots. Dean Williams has recommended you, Professor Lin continued, and I've added my endorsement. But I'm just a first-year student, Sophia said, stunned. Don't they usually take juniors and seniors? Usually, yes, but exceptions are made for exceptional talent. Professor Lin leaned forward. It would be a tremendous opportunity, Sophia. Master classes with world-class musicians, chamber music coaching, private lessons, all while living in New York City for the summer. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. Do I need to audition? Normally, yes. But in this case, Dean Williams has already sent them the video of your performance. They've expressed interest pending a recommendation from one more faculty member. Professor Lin paused. Professor Harmon. Sophia's excitement deflated like a punctured balloon. Oh, I know you two have had your differences, Professor Lin said diplomatically. But after your performance, he may be more receptive than you think. Sophia wasn't convinced. One reluctant compliment backstage didn't erase months of dismissal, and that cutting laugh that still echoed in her memory. His office hours are this afternoon, Professor Lin said, standing to leave. It might be worth a conversation. After Professor Lin left, Sophia remained at the piano, her fingers resting silently on the keys as she considered her options. The summer program would be an incredible opportunity, but was it worth facing Professor Harmon again, this time to ask for a favor? Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. Called the dean's office to get a copy of your performance, just watched it. So proud I can hardly speak. You played from your heart, little songbird. Attached was a photo of her grandmother, sitting in front of her computer, tissues in hand, beaming with pride. The sight gave Sophia an unexpected surge of courage. If her grandmother could survive having her piano taken away during the Cultural Revolution, surely Sophia could survive one uncomfortable conversation with a piano professor. Before she could change her mind, she packed up her things and headed to the faculty building. Professor Harmon's office was at the end of a long corridor, the door slightly ajar. Classical music drifted from within. Bach's well-tempered clavier played with meticulous precision. Sophia stood outside, gathering her nerve, until the piece concluded. Then she knocked softly. Enter, came the professor's voice. His office was smaller than Dean Williams's but more orderly, with neat shelves of books and scores, framed concert programs on the walls, and a small upright piano in the corner. Professor Harmon sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he marked a student's assignment with a red pen. He looked up, surprise briefly crossing his face when he saw Sophia. Ms. Chen, what can I do for you? Sophia took a deep breath. I understand the New York Philharmonic summer program requires 3 faculty recommendations. Dean Williams and Professor Lin have already provided theirs. Ah, Professor Harmon said, setting down his pen. And you're here to ask for the 3rd? Yes, sir. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Sit down, Ms. Chen. Sophia perched on the edge of the chair across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The summer program is extremely competitive, Professor Harmon said. They accept only 8 pianists from across the country, students who have been training intensively for years, students with flawless technique. I know, Sophia said quietly. Your performance at the showcase was memorable, he continued. But it was also flawed. The tempo in the 3rd movement was inconsistent. Your left hand was occasionally hesitant. Your pedaling in the cadenza was imprecise. Each criticism felt like a small cut, but Sophia forced herself to maintain eye contact. I'm aware of those issues, Professor. I'm working to address them. Are you? He raised an eyebrow. Because technical precision isn't something that comes naturally to you, Ms. Chen. It requires hours of focused, methodical practice, not just playing what feels good. With all due respect, sir, Sophia said, surprising herself with her steadiness. I practice 8 hours a day. I've been working on my technical skills since I was 5 years old. What doesn't come naturally to me is performing under pressure, especially when I've been told repeatedly that I don't belong on stage. Something flickered in Professor Harmon's eyes, perhaps surprise at her directness or perhaps recognition. Do you know why I became a piano teacher, Ms. Chen? He asked, abruptly changing the subject. The question caught her off guard. No, sir. I was once a concert pianist, he said. Not famous, but respected. I performed with orchestras across Europe for nearly a decade. He gestured to a framed program on the wall, younger version of himself standing beside a conductor Sophia didn't recognize. What happened? She asked. Performance anxiety, he said simply. It started small, a tremor here, a memory slip there. I practiced more, pushed harder, but it only grew worse. Eventually, during a performance of Liszt's Piano Concerto No. 1 in Budapest, I froze completely. Couldn't play a note. Had to walk off stage. Sophia stared at him, unable to imagine the precise, demanding Professor Harmon experiencing the same fear that plagued her. After that, I turned to teaching, he continued. I decided if I couldn't perform myself, I would at least ensure my students never experienced that kind of humiliation. That they would be so technically prepared that nerves couldn't derail them. Did it work? Sophia asked softly. Professor Harmon's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Sometimes, not always. Music isn't just a technical exercise as much as I might wish it were. There's an unpredictable human element that can't be controlled through practice alone. He picked up a folder from his desk and opened it. Inside was a formal letter with the New York Philharmonic's logo at the top. I've already submitted my recommendation, Ms. Chen. I did it the morning after the showcase. Sophia blinked in surprise. You did? I did, he confirmed. And before you ask, yes, I mentioned your technical shortcomings. I also mentioned your remarkable musicality, your ability to connect with an audience, and your potential for growth. Those qualities are rarer than perfect technique, which can be taught to almost anyone with enough time and discipline. Sophia wasn't sure what to say. After months of believing Professor Harmon thought she was hopeless, this turnaround left her speechless. Don't misunderstand me, he added, removing his reading glasses. You have a tremendous amount of work ahead of you. Your technique needs significant improvement if you're going to succeed at this level, but... He paused. You have something that can't be taught. Something I recognized when you played that first chord at the showcase. What's that? Sophia asked. A voice, Professor Harmon said simply. Your own musical voice. Many technically perfect pianists never find theirs. They can reproduce what's on the page flawlessly, but they can't speak through the instrument. You can. He put the letter back in the folder. That's why I recommended you for the program, despite my reservations. Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes, but she blinked them back. Thank you, Professor. He nodded once, then picked up his red pen again, a clear dismissal. If you're accepted, and I believe you will be, I expect you to work twice as hard on your technical exercises. No more relying solely on your natural musicality. I will, Sophia promised, standing to leave. As she reached the door, Professor Harmon called after her. And Ms. Chen? The masterclass with Yuja Wang is still scheduled for next week. I assume you'll be participating? Sophia turned back. Yes, sir. I've been practicing the Chopin. Good, he said, returning his attention to the papers on his desk. I look forward to hearing it. 3 months later, on a warm summer evening in New York City, Sophia sat in the green room at Lincoln Center, her hands folded in her lap, her heart racing. In 30 minutes, she would walk onto one of the most famous stages in the world to perform as part of the young artist's concert. Her phone buzzed with messages from May and her parents, who were already in the audience. Professor Lin had sent a good luck text earlier in the day. Even Professor Harmon had emailed a brief, characteristically blunt note. Remember what we discussed about the third movement, clean pedaling. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A stage manager poked her head in. Ms. Chen, there's someone here to see you. Sophia expected one of the program directors or perhaps another student. Instead, her grandmother walked in, elegant in a traditional Chinese qipao, her silver hair swept up in a neat bun. Grandmother, Sophia cried, jumping up to embrace her. How are you here? I thought you couldn't get a visa. Grandmother Lin hugged her tightly. Your Professor Harmon wrote a letter to the embassy, explaining the importance of the concert. Apparently his name carries some weight in certain circles. Sophia couldn't believe it. Professor Harmon did that? He did, her grandmother confirmed with a smile. He said it was important for me to hear in person how my teaching methods had influenced your playing. I think he was being sarcastic, but I'm grateful nonetheless. They sat together in the green room, Grandmother Lin holding Sophia's hands in her own weathered ones. Are you nervous, little songbird? Terrified, Sophia admitted, but also ready, I think. Good, her grandmother said. The fear never goes away, you know. Not completely. I was terrified every time I performed, right up until the moment my fingers touched the keys. Then the music took over. Sophia nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Will you tell me again about the day they took your piano away? During the Cultural Revolution? Her grandmother's eyes grew distant with memory. I was teaching a student when they came, government officials with their red armbands. They said the piano was bourgeois, a symbol of Western decadence. They took it on a truck, and I thought I would never play again. But you did, Sophia prompted. Yes, her grandmother smiled. 10 years later, when things changed, I found work at a small music school. Their piano was old, out of tune. But when I played that first chord after a decade of silence, she closed her eyes, reliving the moment. The room hushed, just like your concert hall did. Because true, music speaks directly to the heart, not just the ears. The stage manager reappeared. 5 minutes, Ms. Chen. After her grandmother left to join the others in the audience, Sophia stood alone in the green room, smoothing the skirt of her concert dress, a modern take on the traditional qipao made of deep blue silk with subtle silver embroidery. Her grandmother had brought it from Shanghai, a gift to wear for this performance. As she walked toward the stage, Sophia thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the little girl practicing beside her grandmother, to the terrified student whose hands shook during recitals, to the young woman who had silenced a concert hall with a single chord. Professor Harmon had been both right and wrong about her. She did need more technical practice, more discipline, more precision, but those things alone would never have brought her to this stage. It was the heart behind the music, the voice her grandmother had helped her find, that had opened this door. Standing in the wings, Sophia could see the grand piano waiting center stage, its lid raised, gleaming under the lights. Beyond it sat a full house, her parents and May somewhere in the crowd, her grandmother probably dabbing at her eyes already. The announcer called her name. Applause rippled through the hall as Sophia walked onto the stage, her steps steady, her posture tall. She bowed once, then settled herself at the piano, adjusting the bench, placing her feet on the pedals. For a moment she was back in that practice room at Eastman, Professor Harmon's laughter echoing in her ears. Then she took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and played the first chord. The hall hushed, and Sophia began to speak through music in her own voice, telling her own story, one note at a time.